hand if you've worked with an asshole? A lot of us. Nice. Well, so have I. And I'm going to tell you my story. So a few weeks after graduating from college, I got a job doing HR for an organization. And a few weeks into working there, I attended my first staff meeting. And there was this guy, an asshole, a bully. The president was giving us information, and this guy, he kept interrupting him and saying, what are you talking about? We're not doing that, or just kind of treating the president like he didn't know what he was talking about. And I remember walking back to my office thinking, gosh, I would never let someone talk to me like that, especially in front of other people. That was just the beginning. This guy was an uber excessive micromanager. For example, one of his jobs was to order office supplies. And if you wanted an office supply, you had to ask him for it. And because this was never a pleasant interaction, there was a lot of time spent prepping for this conversation. You'd meditate, do some exercises, do a little yoga, prepare yourself to walk down the hall and ask this guy for an office supply. And you'd humbly hold your hand out and you'd say, could I please have a new pad of Post-its? And he would say, well, what happened to the Post-it notes I gave you a few weeks ago? Are you stealing? And you'd say, no, they're stuck on things around the office. They're here. In all seriousness, he made life really hard. And he treated people like they were totally incompetent. He was really this micromanager. He yelled. He was just a royal jerk. And because he made life hard, a lot of us in the office spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to go around him and avoid him so we could make our lives easier. Well, when he discovered the extent to which we were going around him to make our lives easier, he made our lives a lot harder. And because I was the director of HR, I was the buffer between he and the rest of the organization, and he and I had a balls-out yelling match in the middle of the office, and people were watching us like they were watching a tennis match as we yelled back and forth. And I was exhausted. I felt bullied all the time. And I served as a buffer, and that made me exhausted. And I dealt with all of the organizational repercussions of his behavior. I would hire people in, and they'd leave. And I'd hire more people in, and they'd leave. And I spent a lot of time counseling people after they'd have an interaction with him. You know, they'd come to my office, and I'd have to counsel them. And then I also spent a lot of time getting my own counseling from another manager. Well, during this time, I decided to get a master's degree. And I had a class in grad school called The Dark Side of Communication. And in this class, we learned about all things dark, about human interaction. We learned about stalking and domestic violence. And of course, I had to write a paper on something dark. And so I decided to write a paper on this person. And it was then that I discovered the phrase workplace bullying. There's 30 years of academic research on this topic. And it was really therapeutic to write this paper. I learned I wasn't crazy. This was real. Lots of people all around the world go through it. And I became obsessed. I still am obsessed. Every paper that I wrote in grad school after that was on the topic of bullying. I like to joke that I have a master's degree in workplace bullying. And in fact, I wrote my thesis on workplace bullying, and I dedicated it to the Post-it Nazi, which is what we called our bully. And he knows, so 2 points for me, right? Well, this all, despite the therapy I was getting from writing all these papers, I was still becoming pretty depressed. And I actually had a sign over my alarm clock that said, "Get up," because I needed a reminder to go to work. And it was hard to get to work. And when I was at work, I wasn't working. I wasn't performing. I had hit bottom. I was someone I didn't recognize anymore. I just wasn't performing anymore. And my boss eventually took notice, and he came into my office one day, and he sat down across from me, and he said, "Catherine, what's happening to you? You used to be a top performer." And I burst into tears, and I said, "I hate working here, and I hate what you let this guy do to the office." And I found myself giving a 30-day notice. It was not what I expected to be doing that day. It just sort of came out in a blubbering mess. And he said, "If you're that unhappy, you should leave now." And so he watched me as I packed my things, as I had done when I had fired people before. And he escorted me to the door, as I had done when I had fired people before. And I was extraordinarily embarrassed. I was disappointed in myself. I was someone that I did not recognize. I was someone who had just been fired. But I was about to bounce. So I went on and got another job doing HR for a startup tech firm. And a few months into working there, the economy was starting to go down, and the investor pulled his funds, and I and several people were laid off. And I was kind of angry. There I was, driving home again on a Tuesday in the middle of the day, not what I expected to be doing that day, and between the bullying and being laid off, going back into corporate America wasn't appealing. And so I walked in the door, I sat down on my couch, I opened my laptop, and I bought a website, and I poured my heart onto it. Everything I knew about workplace bullying at the time went on that website. And I learned that all it takes to start a business is one small step, and then another, and then another, and then another. And a few months later, there was an international workplace bullying conference. And so I submitted my thesis paper, and it was accepted to present. And so there I was a few months later at this conference telling people I was a workplace bullying consultant. And I learned that although step by step is certainly important in starting a business, sometimes you got to jump right in head first and stake your claim. And that's what I did. And now here I am, 8 years later. I'm an internationally recognized expert on the topic of workplace bullying. I've written 2 books. I've served clients all over the world, traveled all over the world speaking on the topic. And I have bounced way past any limits I ever thought there were. And the work that I do is so, so important. You all raised your hand. You know what it feels like to be bullied. People who feel bullied are scared and confused and depressed and anxious and hurt. In fact, let me tell you how hurt they are. Twice now, I've had an HR professional call me and tell me that they needed my consulting services because they had a culture of bullying that was so terrible, they'd had a suicide at their workplace. And both times, I submitted a proposal, and the HR professional and I worked together to get the CEO on board, and both times the CEO said, "No, this isn't a priority. We're in compliance. We don't need to focus on changing the culture." And I bawled my eyes out both times I heard that news. I cried for the person who had committed suicide, and I cried for the people who worked there, who had a leader who clearly did not care about them. And I cried for the HR professional who was trying to help, and everybody else in the world who feels bullied, because I know what it feels like. And I cried for the old me. I was the HR professional trying to help, and I was the person who was bullied simultaneously. But when I get to work with a client, it is so, so great. So for example, one client had a culture of bullying, and they wanted my help. And within 6 months of working together on this culture change, the 2 worst bullies quit. Their social power had been taken. They didn't want to be there anymore. Good riddance. And we were able to create an amazing culture where people could thrive. So that's my story about workplace bullying. And I'm going to shift gears here a little bit and tell you one other story. I'm going to tell you about the worst moment in my entire life. We're all friends here, right? So pretty much about exactly 5 years ago, I met a man, and we started dating. And within 5 weeks of dating, I was walking my dog, and I was hit by a trolley, a 120-ton trolley going 20 miles an hour. I don't remember anything. I don't know what I was doing on the tracks or how it happened. But apparently I attempted to stop the trolley with my face because I hit it like this, and my face shattered, so I wasn't very successful. I was taken to the trauma unit where I was for 9 days, and I have a bunch of metal plates and 64 screws in my face, and this really cool chicken wire contraption that holds my eye socket together. And I learned that people will kick you when you're down. My story was on the news, and people cyberbullied me. And they said hateful things. They said I was so stupid that I should not be alive, and they wished that trolley had killed me. And they said that I was too stupid to own a dog, and they hoped the Humane Society took that dog from me. The dog's okay, by the way. And as for that man that I was dating, he wanted to come and see me in the hospital. And I told him no. We'd only been dating for 5 weeks. I was a complete mess. I did not know how long it was going to take me to recover. And did I mention I was a mess? And he said, no, I just want to come and see you and make sure that you're okay. And I agreed. And I should have braced myself, because when I agreed, it meant that I was about to bounce. Because despite the fact that I had an eye sewn shut, I was missing teeth, my jaw was wired shut, my face was this big, swollen, both arms were in casts, and I had a hobble because I had been thrown several feet. He kept coming back. And I learned that it's okay to be vulnerable. Because he and we fell in love, and we're married, and we have a beautiful daughter. I also learned that being positive is really important to recovering. People kept telling me how positive I was. I learned something about myself. People just kept saying, gosh, you're so positive. I could never be that positive. And the doctors kept telling me how positive I was, and they were convinced that that was the reason I was recovering so fast. In fact, 30 days after being hit by a 120-ton trolley, I was back at work, missing teeth and all. I also learned that the key to recovery is just taking one small step, and then another, and then another, and then another. And I did a lot of little things so I could take care of myself. For example, I bought front closed bras so that I could dress myself. And I bought a travel hair dryer that was light so I could blow dry my own hair, even though I had both arms in casts. The bottom provides a platform to bounce from. And now I know that when I hit bottom, all that means is that I have to brace myself, because it means I'm about to bounce. In fact, you know what? It means I'm about to soar.